Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Travel horror stories. Here's my story. I was leaving from Pécs, Hungary to Zurich, catching a flight there back to Boston via JFK in NYC. To get to Zurich I needed to take a 5-hour bus ride to Budapest, take the subway a few stops until I reached the main rail station. I was tired, hungry, and thirsty by the time I got to Budapest. I decided to carry on and hold it until I got to the main railway station. I made it there just in time. Something about holding it in for that long really exhausted me, and I just wanted to get on the train and sleep. After waiting 2 hours my train arrived and I found my cabin. There were 2 portly Hungarian girls already in there watching movies on their laptop, and they seemed very friendly and easygoing. I mingled a little to be friendly, but really just wanted to sleep. Then arrived disaster. These 2 Roma girls literally fell into our cabin laughing their heads off and blasting dance music on their Nokias. They were blasting 2 different songs on 2 different Nokia. Now I ride the subway every day in Boston, so I'm used to pricks who don't know how to use headphones, so I didn't think too much of it. They didn't speak a lick of English, but I guess really took a liking to me since every time I closed my eyes I would get poked in the side of the head and giggled at like I was an animal. They really wanted to talk to me through the other Hungarian girls, asking if I had a girlfriend, where I was from, occasionally breaking out a few lines of broken English themselves like handsome boy, while petting my head. I believe in personal space, but I also know trying to argue with them would probably be futile. After a while I fell into one of my books realizing I would soon get no sleep. I don't know at what point this happened, but somebody broke out a porno and put it on the Hungarian girl's laptop. I would get poked, shown the porno, and laughed at. Now I'm no slouch. When it comes time to get nasty, I get nasty, but this was just not the time for this. I was not attracted to these girls, they smelled like hockey players' feet, and I was going on 24 hours with no sleep. Plus, I had just left my girlfriend in Pécs, and I was still am in love. I wasn't going to screw around. Finally, one of them puts her hand on my junk, bites my ear and asks me, "You want me?" To which I replied nem, taking her hand out of my lap. I then got a barrage of Segra from the 2 Roma look it up. I spent the next 6 hours with these girls blasting music, poking me, berating me, and holding in fear of them riffling. I guess I'm kind of a pushover in these situations. I didn't want to overreact, I just wanted the train ride to end without getting stabbed by 2 girls. I guess karma shifted my way overall. When we hit the Switzerland border the girls were detained by Border Patrol, probably for being Roma. That sucks and everything. I know that the Roma people have a bad rap in Europe, but I hated these girls at this point, I hated them so hard. I got a good 1 hour of drifting in and out of naps, but I still felt scared when we pulled into the Zurich train station. More good news: when I arrived at Zurich airport, I found out they overbooked the flight, and I had been bumped up to first class. I went from sharing a cramped quarter with 2 Roma snookies, to having a chair that turned into a bed, unlimited wine, and a 4-course meal. I'm sure somebody has had it worse, just wanted to share my experience. My wife and I were taking a car ride from Delhi to Agra, and along the way on a fairly bare stretch of highway, a weird guy jumped out in front of us with a pair of scissors held up to another guy's neck, trying to get us to stop or else he would kill the guy. When he realized we weren't stopping, he threw the man in front of our car and started slashing at the car. We barely dodged the guy thrown in front of the car and made it out safe. We had no idea what was going on and it freaked us out quite a bit. In the Greek islands our taxi driver accused us of putting a dent in the side of his cab, after we gave the roof a tap to let him know we were all out of the car. Next thing I know, he has my friend by the throat, all of the iOS locals come running out and pin us all against the wall until the cops rock up, 2 guys in no uniform, and chuck both of my friends in the car, without asking any questions. I run to the police station, a dingy little shack with no sign or anything, to find out that both of my mates attempted to run away, because they didn't believe these men were police. They asked for it but were told to be quiet. They caught one of them, the other got away. As a result, the one who got caught was beaten up and chucked in a cell. Cue me, I rock up to the station, to find none of these police officers can barely speak English. The taxi driver is there going crazy talking in Greek to these police officers and pointing at me than his car. I know what he is telling them. I try to act out what happened by pointing to the dent in the back, shaking my head then miming tapping on the roof. They grab me and take me off the premise. As I wait out on the road, a friend of the taxi driver tries to fight me. I hold him away and say no. One of the police officers comes out the front and sees us, and thankfully this guy backs off. Eventually, they get these young police officer, the only one who can speak English, to tell me they won't talk to me until I bring my other mate back to the police station. This guy was reasonable. I later found out that he was the one who stopped the other police officers from beating my friend in the cell to a pulp. He told me as soon as I bring the other guy back, we can sort this all out. I ran back to the hotel, grabbed my friend, thankfully he was there, and we headed back. Anyway, long story short, they were saying we could either pay the taxi driver the damages worth €200, or my friends would get taken to another island and put on trial. It was completely vague, I knew it, but we had to leave at 11 a.m. the next day, and it was already 4 a.m. I had enough. I just agreed to pay the money to the crooked person. Really bad way to end what was such a great trip to Europe. But all was well in the end. We split the fine, and I got my friends out slightly in one piece. I bet the police officers and the taxi driver split the cash too. Driving from Jerusalem to Amman. It's really not that far and much faster/easier than flying. Just take an Israeli taxi to the King Hussein Bridge cross, and take a Jordanian taxi from there, all for much less than a much slower trip would be. I was already in a bad mood because just prior to leaving Jerusalem, I bought a ticket to walk around the tops of the old city walls. One last tourist thing. I caught up with a group of Russian tourists and walked with them. I speak Russian and they were pretty fun, including one who took his shirt off, joking with me about being attracting the ladies. Full disclosure, I'm a girl. As we passed above the Arab quarter, these cute kids right below us shouted up hello. When we answered in English, they threw rocks at us and hit one guy in the neck. They were throwing up. It didn't hurt too much, but speaking English and going shirtless was enough to get pelted, and it was upsetting. Everyone had been so nice to me up until then. So, I was already in a bad mood when I caught a cab. Things started to get better when my nice Palestinian taxi driver told me lots of funny Palestinian jokes as we drove along. Then we stopped at one checkpoint on the highway, but it looked like it would be a quick stop until I presented my passport. I'm a dual US/EU citizen and was using my US passport in Israel because I was told that border control would stamp a card, instead of the actual passport, for US citizens so that I could later travel to Arab countries that won't allow people who visit Israel to enter. The Israeli soldiers, police, saw my US passport and smiled at me. Then they opened it, saw place of birth, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and their faces fell. They went from seeing me as a friend to looking hurt that I was an enemy without my opening my mouth. Then the search took a little longer. When we got to the bridge, we were too late. It closed 10 minutes before sundown, to reopen the next morning. The border guards told us of another a few km down the road, so we tried to find it. We got lost. Very lost. It was dark, there were few lights, no signs, and my driver had never been there before. We finally found a middle-aged Orthodox Jewish man walking by, so my driver asked him in Hebrew where the bridge was. He gave directions, but the driver said he suspected the guy deliberately gave us the wrong directions to mess with him because he's Palestinian. I dismissed this as paranoia until we ran into two secular-looking Israeli girls a few minutes later who gave us the correct directions, very contrary to the ones the Orthodox guy gave us. We found the bridge, paid my driver, and entered the border crossing office on foot. That was okay, but finding the bus that actually crossed the bridge was a bit hard in the dark. When the near-empty bus stopped on the Jordanian side, everyone but me had someone to pick them up. I walked 200 meters or so to the taxi stand, easy to find as the one light in the distance, where I signed a book with my information, passport number, taxi driver's name and license, etc. This seemed like a safe system, and I got into the front seat of the rickety cab with confidence. As we drove along the highway, we chatted a little and everything seemed fine. All of a sudden the driver pulled onto a dark, unlit road leading up into the mountains running to the left of the highway. I immediately protested and insisted on returning to the main road. The driver told me that the mountain road was a shortcut, but I said I'd pay the metered fare for the longer main route that went through towns. He went back to the highway, and then creeped me out even further, asking me if I had anyone waiting for me in Amman. I lied and said yes, my husband flew in from Dubai earlier that day and was already at the hotel. Shortly after that his wife called him on his cell phone and he had me talk to her to vouch for his whereabouts. When we got to Amman and found the hotel, we couldn't find the entrance. I wanted out of that cab so badly, I said it was fine, paid and got out. It was late at night, without a person on the street, and I had to walk around a scary block to find the front of the hotel, well lit with a lot full of cars and a smiling door attendant. I've never been so glad to see a meridian in my life. Took the last train from Vienna to Bratislava in the middle of the night in order to get to the airport early in the morning. I was the only one on the train other than the conductor/engineer/whatever. The train slowly came to a halt a little after the Slovakian border in the middle of the countryside on a dark platform, and the man told me to get out. Confused and scared, I did so, and the train left. I had about 2 minutes of utter panic before another guy came around the corner and directed me to the correct train, which started up just then. I hadn't known I was supposed to transfer. I arrived in Bratislava about 1:30 a.m. I disembarked and made my way through the tunnel under the tracks to come up inside the train station. The entire place was deserted, the lights were off, and I could hear dripping water echoing through the building. I could see a circular drive outside with a few taxis waiting and a 24-hour snack stand, so I decided to wait outside until the first buses began running and I could catch the correct one to the airport. However, the doors were locked. I couldn't get out. As I was trying all the doors to find an open one, a woman with wild eyes and wild hair appeared from outside, began hurling herself bodily at the glass doors, yelling, and trying to get inside the station. I skedaddled off to a deserted corner and sat down and cried a little bit because I was tired and scared. I realized that if any other person came into the station from the platforms, I would be trapped and have no way to escape. Eventually, I steeled myself and went back out onto the platform. I ended up clambering over the train tracks and walking alongside them for an exceptionally long time until the fence ended, where I came into a residential neighborhood. Luckily, I came across a police officer who directed me back toward the station. I sat on a bench outside near the snack stand until morning came. There was no sign of the woman with the crazy eyes. This happened last winter. My best friend and I were traveling around China, and I had a terrible experience on the train from Chongqing to Wuhan. Basically, we could only get hard seats, and sitting across from us was this rural man who chain-smoked and spoke really loudly the entire time. He spent an hour detailing why he hated foreigners, not realizing my friend and I could understand him the entire time. It was an overnight train too, and by the time we got on the train, my back was already hurting from tall people's problems, and the night on the train did not help. I've taken hard seat trains for 14 hours, but that really was the worst train ride I've had in China. I was 18, and it was my first time traveling alone. I went to Argentina for 3 months. My first week in, and I'm wandering around Buenos Aires. At the time I enough Spanish to get by, and a man approaches me and asks for directions in Spanish. I told him that I'm not from here. He then asks me if I am a tourist. I say yes, and he seems delighted, quickly telling me that he is too. He offers up the idea of exploring the city together. I, alone in the big city, agree. We start walking together, and he seems like a really nice guy. After about an hour, he says, "Tango hombre, I'm hungry." I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and it's about 1, so we went to a nice restaurant. He tells me I have to try the steaks and red wine. I'm not much of a wine fan, but he convinces me. We are there about an hour, and the bill comes. It was 140 pesos. He pulls out 100 pesos. I try to pay for my half, but he only lets me pay 40 pesos. He tells me I can get the beers later. We continued on our little adventure, and eventually came to a bar with outdoor seating. The server brings out a liter of beer, and we relax. Soon enough, another liter comes out. We finish the second liter and leave this bar. Then I woke up 8 hours later, missing my debit card, iPod, cell phone, and travel guide. At 15 years old on French exchange, my host family decided they didn't like me, and I had to move to a new family. Their etiquette for approaching the situation involved writing me a letter in French reading one in France does not, followed by a list of strange accusations. Not showering enough, not washing my clothes enough, sorry Australians don't wash clothes until they're actually dirty, stealing their food, being too friendly with boys at school, I was like totally a year older than those losers no thanks, and going through their personal files on their computer. I'm in IT and fixed their lag box with the father's permission, ingrates, and what would a 15-year-old have been looking for? Their tax files. The best part is that this happened on Christmas Eve while the exchange program offices were closed, so I got to spend an awkward Christmas with their extended family before I could get help after Boxing Day. Also, in a small town with no other exchange students. Alone. The exchange program investigated, deciding that I was innocent, and the host mother/sister were surprising. So instead of being sent home for misconduct, I got to move to a new family in Paris. So, the remaining 3 weeks were awesome. United Kingdom. Train from Sinuiju to Pyongyang in North Korea. Supposed to take 6 hours ended up taking 13 hours. Unheated train, so it was about -15 in the cabin. Kept falling asleep only to wake up because my feet were in agony from the cold. The train carriage was full of KPA soldiers who dealt with the situation by playing revolutionary music on their mobile phones and getting drunk, which was nerve-wracking as some of them were armed. Also accidentally washed a cigarette on the uniform of someone who looked fairly senior too, awkward. My girlfriend and I backpacked Croatia last summer. We arrived at Split and eventually found our accommodation. After having a rest from the midday heat, we decided to head out into town and see what was. The first thing we noticed was armed police on every corner, fully tooled up with machine guns, dogs, body armor, and we were like, oh, maybe that's how they do it over here, having known that they had some rough football fans over there. We carry on exploring the old town and eventually decide to head home, only to be told by a huge police officer not that way, which was the only way we knew back to our accommodation. We turned round and tried to get out of the other end of the street and were met with a similar response in less English there. All the while the streets were filling up with more Croats. So, we wound our way through a maze of old town streets around Diocletian's palace. The whole time we could hear extremely loud bangs and explosions and the odd screaming, shouting, and chanting. Obviously, this was quite scary as we didn't know where we were, and it was our first day there. We ended up coming out on the main strip by the sea, where there were literally about 3,000 people on either side of the street behind barriers who were all shouting as well, and there was smoke coming from down the street. We turned back to the maze of alleys and were met by hundreds of people running past us and screaming, and the acrid smell of CS gas. We went back to the front to try and avoid choking out and being separated. When we got back to the front, we found out that it was a gay pride parade of about 30 to 50 people marching due to police killing a gay person a few weeks earlier. Due to this, the whole city had come out to heckle and attack them, thousands against only a few. It was one of the most eye-opening and terrifying experiences I've ever witnessed. children, women, and terrifying men hurling abuse and rocks at people. The first time I crossed the border from Laos to Vietnam, I took a bus from Vientiane to Hanoi. We left at 6 p.m. one night. All of us were tourists, and there were 3 drivers. For the duration of the journey to the border, they played incredibly loud and annoying Laotian music complete with whiny female singing and twanging, out-of-tune guitars. Now I love everything from free jazz to gamelan to Mali and kora to Indian sitar, but Southeast Asian pop music is unspeakably awful. We eventually arrived near a border crossing around 1 a.m. and stopped. Except we didn't know it was a border crossing. We couldn't see any buildings or hear any cars. It felt like we were going to be robbed and left in the middle of nowhere. The drivers turned off the lights and went to sleep on the floor of the bus. They left the music on, extraordinarily loud. When someone asked them to turn it down, they turned it up and laughed. One of the drivers started to touch a girl's leg. Her boyfriend was next to her. The boyfriend was massive, but she was afraid to wake him up in case he started a fight, and all hell broke loose. After several hours of hell with sobbing girls and people desperate to sleep, not to mention confused and a little scared about what was going on, we left for the 5-minute journey to the border around 6 a.m. When we got to the border, we had to queue for ages in a dirty room. Sheets of rain fell on what felt like an extremely high crossing. We were treated like cattle and then had to pay $1 to get our passports back, despite already having paid $55 for visas before leaving Laos. The border police slept in the filthiest hovels you can imagine. The walls were black with damp, there were pools of dark water in the rooms and filthy sheets on the beds. We arrived late that same day in Hanoi, exhausted, filthy, suspicious of everyone and emotionally drained. The first thing I did when I arrived at my guest house was to order a beer. To this day, that ice-cold tiger beer is the best I've ever had. The funny thing is though, I went back to Asia the next year and did the exact same bus trip. Being able to tell other backpackers why we stopped at 1 a.m. and not having to listen to music as we slept actually made it tolerable, though I'll never do it again. Not really travel, more so work, but I took a job as an English tutor, unofficial, not through an agency, for a 9-year-old girl in Italy, and instead became more of a domestic servant, getting paid less than we agree on, cleaning, driving their kid around, and cooking. Teaching English was to be done through interacting in a fun way. If I actually tried to do a lesson or a worksheet, she would say, "My daughter doesn't find that fun," and then after about a month of this the mom got mad at me that they weren't learning. So, I got a pay cut. Again. Their daughter was horribly spoiled and lazy, and 2 months into the job they fired me because she signed up for gymnastics, so they didn't want to pay someone to be with her since she now has class for 2 hours a day after school. Okay. Awesome. Except I had already purchased my return ticket, so I had almost 2 additional months in Europe with no lodging or source of income. I would have left without delay, but a friend from home already booked her trip to come see me and backpack. So, they paid me the €500 we agreed on for airfare reimbursement before I started the job, only she decided that it's dollars she meant, not euros, and she didn't mean to hit the euro key on the keyboard when we emailed, but rather the dollar. So, I get about €300, and she deducts €2 for the gas used to drive me to the train station. Then she emailed me asking me to send them money for the soap and toothpaste I took with me. Mind you, this family owned 3 houses all in wealthy areas of Italy, a yacht, and a house in Aruba. Me taking a half-used bar of soap was not life or death. Semi-mugged in New York. I say semi, as the guy didn't have a weapon, just used words and asked us for money. Was late at night, my friend and I were drunk and hungry, so we went to McDonald's in Times Square. Sketchy dude is just loitering around in there, not eating or anything. Sketchy dude comes up to us continually saying, "Here, take this," while trying to shove something in our hands. I just ignore him completely, but my friend falls into the trap of actually engaging the guy by saying no, etc. After a while, my friend gives in and takes the package. Now sketchy dude is telling us that the package is drugs. Strange, because normally you would be more specific, and we have to pay him for it. Sketchy dude also claims that the other standing around in the MCCs is with him and that they're both going to bash us if we don't pay up. Of course, sketchy dude refuses to take the package back instead of payment. Sketchy dude and other are bigger than us, and we're drunk, so I knew that we'd have no chance if things turned violent. We wouldn't even be able to run away fast enough if we tried. At first I offer sketchy dude £5 telling him that it's worth much more than $USD. He wouldn't take it, so I handed over $20 to sketchy dude. While all this is going on, I'm looking over to the staff trying to point out that we need help, without saying anything to provoke sketchy dude, but they either didn't understand or didn't want to get involved, maybe assuming we were actually wanting to buy drugs? Now sketchy dude is saying that we want more money. So, I give him a bit of talking to saying that he's done very well and that I'll give him another $20, but then that will be the end of it, and he has to leave. He agrees and sticks to the deal. I give him a second $20 note, then he runs out. Others don't leave or even pay any attention to any of us, and they didn't even know each other. My friend puts the package in his pocket, and we go upstairs to eat. Knowing America's war on drugs and high incarceration rate, I'm still messing myself more about getting done for possession than I was about sketchy dude messing us up. My friend goes into the toilets to inspect the package, which is rolled up in a paper napkin. Luckily, it turns out to just be more napkins rolled up inside, nothing more. So, the lesson of the day is, don't just say no to drugs or random sketchy dudes, as that makes them engage and lock onto you rather than moving on to someone else. Always better to just pretend you can't see or hear them at all. I've fallen into the trap a couple of times myself with hobos wanting to fight me for saying no when I should have just ignored them completely. So, in the end, all good. No one got hurt, and I paid $40 for a travel story to tell my friends, and you. I was overlanding through Africa and the group had stopped in Harare, Zimbabwe for the afternoon. Several of us had visited the National Art Gallery and split up afterwards. I was wandering back to the truck with one other guy, and we were doing the usual touristy thing of taking pictures of the city. It so happened that the trees which lined some of the streets were all out in full purple bloom, so there were some good photo opportunities. We took a few photos, and I was taking one last one when my mate, let's call him Metal, turned round to me and said, "I think we need to go over there and speak to that guy." To which I replied why, half expecting another person trying to sell us something. Metal then said, "Well, he's the one with the rifle." This then made me think over everything I'd done in the last few hours as we crossed over the road to the guard. There was nothing I'd done that was illegal to my knowledge, so what's this all about? We reach the guard, and he begins to ask us why we're taking photos of the street. Metal does the talking to start with telling the guy holding the AK that we're just tourists and that we've come here to see your beautiful city. This, however, does not go down particularly well and the guard isn't satisfied with our answers, and when we try to start walking away he points the AK at us and again we tell him we're only tourists. He's still not satisfied with our answers and tells us we have to come with him. This throws us a little, as we're not sure where he wants to take us, and he motions over another guard. I'm still supporting the tourist comments made by Metal and glancing around at the same time to see if I can see any other members of our group, or the group leaders, etc. It's at this point I see little notices on the wall of the building we're next to and it says you're not allowed to take pictures, use your phone to call, or receive calls, or even hang around the area. So unsurprisingly, I begin to wonder what's associated with this building. We again tell the guard that we do not want to come with him, and we are only tourists. He then unclicks the safety of his AK, and it's at this moment pointing at my gut. I'm standing there thinking if he has negligent discharge, then I'm going to have a hole in my lower back the size of my fist / the round may hit my spine, and either way that'll be the end of me. We relented after asking why we were going many times and stopping and starting, and walked into the large parking area behind the building and walked towards the small guard's office at the rear of the building. A larger, fatter guard steps out after the first guard goes in and explains the situation. the second guard still watches us the whole time. Essentially we can't sneak away, and the car park is too open anyway. We have another conversation with the guy who's slightly higher up the chain of command, and we again explain that we're just tourists. At this moment in time, I'm also thinking that we may end up losing our cameras or having to pay a large fine/bribe or both, and/or end up being detained. I didn't particularly like the thought of a Zimbabwean jail. It turned out that we'd inadvertently taken pictures of the president's office. Luckily though, we managed to reason with the third guard and delete the pictures we'd taken. This seemed to satisfy him, which meant by the chain of command the first and second guards would be satisfied too. We then turned sharply away from the small guard's house, walked quickly out of the compound round the barrier and off out into the city. The face of another guard when we walked past him, because we walked in one way and out a unique way, was particularly memorable as he watched two white tourist-looking people walk out the back of the president's office building. Lesson learned: be careful of where you take photos, as you might not know what you're inadvertently taking pictures of. United States. Oh, my goodness, yes. So last summer I went on a petite Euro trip to Western Europe with two friends of mine. Our first destination was Paris. On our last night there, we spent the night drinking at the Garden of Tuileries with our Irish hostelmates. We end up getting pretty blasted, and my friend becomes unattached from his bag for about 2 minutes. After these 2 minutes, he realizes he put his bag down and rushes back to where we were to go grab it, only to realize that it's gone. Completely gone. Along with the €250 he just extracted from an ATM, his debit card, his passport, his Eurail pass, and pretty much everything else important in his life at that time. Again, this was the night before we had to hop on a train to Amsterdam. We ended up having to stay a couple of extra days to help try to recover the damage, etc. Of course, this turns out to be July 4th weekend as well, meaning the US Embassy wouldn't open until the following Tuesday. I believe it was a Friday night the event occurred. In the end, it was cheaper for him to stay in Paris and have us complete the Euro trip than for him to come along with us. Plus, it would take him another 2 weeks to get another passport reissued. My friend lost all his stuff while drinking and we abandoned him in Paris for the remainder of the trip. More horror stories in that trip include my friend getting a concussion and having to spend 5 days in a Berlin hospital, having the German railways go on strike which completely derailed our journey from Prague to Florence, missing our flight to Ibiza by 3 minutes, etc. etc. Since OP failed to deliver, I've got an actual scary story. The first time I went to Italy, the plan was to spend 3 days in Venice, take the train to Rome and spend a week there. I went with my mother and little sister. My sister and I worked all summer to go. This was when I was in high school, and Venice was absolutely beautiful. At around 9 we looked for somewhere for supper and have some cheap fixed menu meals. I got the chicken while my mom and sister got the steak, and it tasted extremely funny. My mother joked, "You never know, that might be pigeon you're eating." I laughed weakly, ate 2 bites, and set it aside. Fast forward to the next morning. My mother was dragging me out of the chaise lounge I was sleeping in because we were going to be late for the train. Everything hurt and I couldn't figure it out until I suddenly burst into the bathroom, seeing everything I had eaten the past day. I empty my bowels and try to get everything out of my system before I get on the train. When we get to the train station I have the need to throw up again, and of course, the bathroom costs €1. So here I am throwing up in a garbage can in front of this group of Italian grannies, nonnas if you will. One of them was nice enough to offer me a napkin, which I still have as a memento of this occasion. Empty myself during the entire train ride, and while we were trying to find our hotel, the climax of my situation, and I couldn't even tell until I felt moist. Then, as any 16-year-old girl would do in that situation, I cried. I can't even imagine what my mom was going through. I was knocked out by food poisoning for half of Rome. So, this story is completely my fault, I'll be honest. I was 21, in university. I had taken a couple of weeks in the middle of the semester to go with some friends to Europe. We were in Germany and got faced in the hotel lobby. So, there I was drunk as hell and stumbled upstairs to our room. I thought it would be a brilliant idea to pop in the shower. I ended up passing out on the drain and it flooded the entire room, waterlogging all of my friends' stuff. Being the only chick on this trip, my male friends walk in on me buck-ass naked and try to help me into bed. We alert the hotel and everything and they try to dry it out. Turns out they couldn't, and it destroyed everything under the carpet. So, I had to get my dad to wire a few thousand from the States to cover the damages. In retrospect, the hotel probs had insurance to cover it, but whatever. The story concisely is that I was sharing a hostel room in Prague with two strangers from Colorado. They came into the room at around 2 a.m., falling down drunk. The boy told the girl to lock the door. The girl broke the wrong key off in the door. We were trapped in there for 6 hours until somebody finally heard us screaming and pounding on the fire-safe door. We were 4 stories up and the only ones on our floor at the time. The horror part of it is that we all had to use the bathroom at some point. And we all did. Did some major bonding with those crazy Colorado kids? Missed a flight and spent, I think, 8 hours in Berlin airport with my then GF now wife because we arrived at the check-in counter 37 minutes before departure instead of the required 40 minutes and they wouldn't let us board. For some reason, the check-in counters there were after security where we got held up for just long enough for us to be late. Our fault, we should have gotten up another half hour earlier. Anyhow, that 8 hours actually turned out to be just about the most memorable part of that trip. Once, had the following scheduled with my mom and brother. 5-hour flight to Singapore, 8-hour layover, flight to Dubai, 8-hour layover, 30-minute flight to Doha. That whole series of flights was pretty horrendous, but, again, I have lots of nice memories from passing time in Singapore and Dubai airports with my mom and brother. I was in Jamaica with my GF and was crossing off a bucket list dream of mine by attending Reggae Sunsplash. We rent a cab for the night, and he drives us to a venue out in the countryside, quite far from our hotel. The concert is great, and I'm having an awesome time. Some Jamaican guy keeps giving me dirty looks, but I don't think too much about it. We were pretty much the only white people there, so I figured that was the reason. He comes over and offers me a joint. I'm like, okay, maybe he was just checking me out to see if I was cool. He tells me that we should walk off to the side, so we don't get in trouble and starts leading me to the beach. Alarm bells start going off and I catch the eye of this older expat white lady selling beads. She looks at the guy and then back at me and suddenly shakes her head at me. We get a little way into the palms, and I tell the guy that this is far enough. He then turns to me and demands $100 for the weed we just smoked. I tell him no way and he say you don't understand, we're the mafia down here. You see that police officer over there? If you don't give me the money he's going to find some weed on you and lock you up. And those guys in prison are going to kill you. I'm no pussy and I've taken some martial arts, but let me tell you I was scared. The odds were so against me, I didn't know where I was completely out of my element, and I had heard stories of Jamaican police corruption and Jamaican jails. I gave him what I had on me, walked back to my GF, and told her what happened. We left immediately, and she yelled at me the whole way back to our hotel for being so stupid. Jamaican guy offers me a smoke, he was not cool. I recently traveled home from Europe last weekend. We had been traveling for 20 hours when we realized that we would miss our connecting flight home due to a delayed flight in Amsterdam. We were advised by the airline to rent a car in Atlanta and drive the rest of the distance home to Asheville. We were able to book a car with Hertz in Atlanta and a lovely lady helped us at the desk as we were deliriously tired and very frustrated with the whole experience and still looking forward to 5 hours of driving to finally make it home. When making the booking, I accidentally put that it would be a round-trip rental. The woman at the desk said it would not be a problem to change and would be a slight difference in fee, but we just had to call the customer service line when on the road and they would handle it. We did what we were advised to do and received a separate email with an invoice at that time in the amount of $239 total. When we arrived in Asheville to drop the car off, I requested a receipt but was told they could not provide me with one as they were separate from the corporate office where we got our car. They did remark on how much more expensive the $145 per day charge the Atlanta office charged us than what they charged. When I checked my credit card later in the week, I had a charge of $411, almost double what I was quoted at the Hertz office in Atlanta. This is a significantly bigger number than the $239 that was sent to me via email after speaking with your representative. To make matters worse, I was told to apply for reimbursement from the airline immediately after returning home, so I applied for the $239 told me since I was not given a receipt upon drop-off. Now, I find out that I have been charged almost double what I was reimbursed for a week after the fact. Hertz practices seem predatory to take advantage of people in dire circumstances. It is unacceptable that I was not informed of the astronomical difference in price when I was still in Atlanta. In fact, I was told the difference would be minimal. Furthermore, it is unacceptable that I was not provided with a receipt directly upon returning the car to the Hertz location in Asheville so that I could request reimbursement for the actual amount I was charged. I am incredibly angry at the predatory practices of Hertz and disappointed that it is deemed acceptable by their company to take advantage of your customers by not giving them necessary information until it is too late. Or anyone in my situation in the future, be advised that Hertz will add charges without informing their customers of the exact changes and then will not give a receipt upon returning a vehicle so that there is nothing you can do when their final charge comes through. I've got a good one. I was traveling with my friend, who is also female, and my boyfriend in India. We were leaving Jaipur, India, and wanted to catch the train to Jaisalmer. We were only able to get reserve tickets, and so didn't definitely have seats. We turned up at the train station an hour early for the midnight train, but nobody could tell us if we could get on the train or not. We were told to ask the conductor once the train got into the station. Well, the train pulled in and trains in India are massively long. We ran up and down the platform with our packs on for all of the 20 minutes the train was in the station. Eventually the train started to pull out again and we had obviously missed our chance to talk to the conductor. We decided to just jump on the train and work it out with the conductor on board. We did this because several people, including Indians, had given us the advice that foreign tourists are usually treated really well by Indian train guards, and it's fine to get on a train even if you don't have tickets. Obviously, this is a horror story thread and so you can guess that this wasn't the case for us. Please don't get on a train in India if you don't already have a ticket. Well, we eventually located the conductor on board the train and he was furious with us. He insisted we get off at the very next station. We tried to bribe him, but he turned out to be seriously religious and it just made matters worse. He threw us off the train at a place called Phalera at 2 a.m. I'm guessing you've never heard of it. It's a place, no taxis, no hotels. Outside the train station about 30 homeless people sat around watching Bollywood movies on tiny ancient computer monitors. Inside the station an old tantra practitioner-looking guy was smoking weed out of an old bell. It was all as creepy as it sounds. Now, usually in this kind of situation I'd be worried we were about to be mugged and murdered, but I was too focused on the growing nausea that I'd been trying to fight for hours. We were trying to work out what to do at the train station when my boyfriend went off to use the loo. My friend and I stayed with the bags. I was staring into the middle distance when suddenly I needed to go worse than I had ever done before in my life. I sprinted off to find my boyfriend. He had the loo paper, but I didn't make it. At Phalera train station. I came down with a fever rapidly after that, so we had no choice but to book tickets on the next train back to Jaipur. I had my revenge on the Indian Railways, though. On the way back to Jaipur I threw up in a sink and it was too chunky to wash down the plug hole, so I had to just leave it. We went right back to the hotel we had just left, and I spent the next 2 days in a kind of gastro-induced blur. Giardia, by the way. Generally, I advocate traveling alone, but during this whole experience I literally couldn't cope. The others did everything. I've never been so glad to have travel companions.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.